Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. The Roommate Who Never Slept. I still wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes, and the first thing I do is check if anyone's watching me sleep. It's been 2 years since I lived with Sarah, but I can't shake the memory of her sitting at that desk, perfectly still, staring at nothing. Or maybe staring at me. I thought I'd hit the roommate lottery during my freshman year at State, while my friends complained about partying roommates who brought strangers back at all hours or slobs who left dirty dishes everywhere. I got Sarah Chen, quiet, studious, respectful. She kept her side of the room immaculate, never hogged the bathroom, and always wore headphones when she studied late. Perfect, right? Our dorm room in Henderson Hall was typical. 2 twin beds, 2 desks, 2 wardrobes, barely enough space to walk between everything. Sarah had claimed the side by the window, which was fine by me since I preferred being closer to the door anyway. She'd arranged her space with military precision, textbooks stacked by height, pens organized by color, bed made so tightly you could bounce a quarter off it. The first few weeks went smoothly. We established an easy routine. I'd go to bed around midnight after finishing my homework, and she'd stay up later studying. She was pre-med, taking organic chemistry and advanced biology, so I figured she just had more work than my general education classes required. I'd fall asleep to the soft sound of her turning pages or typing quietly on her laptop. I'm a heavy sleeper normally, always have been. In high school, my mom had to shake me awake every morning because 3 different alarm clocks couldn't do the job. So when I started waking up randomly in the middle of the night during my 3rd week at college, I assumed it was just stress or too much caffeine. But every time I woke up, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., Sarah was sitting at her desk, not studying, not reading, not on her computer, just sitting there perfectly upright in her chair, facing the wall above her desk. Her hands would be folded in her lap, her back straight, completely motionless, like a statue. At first, I thought maybe she was taking study breaks or meditating. I'd seen some students talking about mindfulness techniques for managing college stress. But something about her posture bothered me. She sat too still, breathed too quietly. Sometimes I'd watch her for 10 or 15 minutes and she wouldn't move at all, not even to shift in her chair or scratch an itch. I started paying more attention during the day, trying to figure out when she slept. She was always up before me in the mornings, already showered and dressed by the time my first alarm went off at 7 a.m. I'd see her throughout the day at meals or in the library, alert and focused, never showing signs of exhaustion. When I'd return to the room after evening classes or study groups, she'd be at her desk working. After 2 weeks of this pattern, I worked up the courage to ask her about it. We were both getting ready for bed. I was in my pajamas brushing my teeth, and she was sitting at her desk in the same clothes she'd worn all day. I asked, trying to keep it light and friendly. She turned to look at me, and I noticed she moved her entire body instead of just her head, like her neck was stiff. "I sleep when you sleep," she said with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But I see you awake when I wake up at night," I said. Her smile widened slightly. That response made my stomach twist, but I didn't want to argue. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I was so stressed about college that I was having vivid dreams about waking up. It seemed more plausible than my roommate never sleeping. But then I started setting quiet alarms on my phone. 2:15 a.m., 3:30 a.m., 4:45 a.m. Different times each night, never the same pattern, and every single time Sarah was sitting at her desk in that same rigid position, staring at the wall. During my 5th week at college, I decided to test something. I stayed awake one night, pretending to sleep. I closed my eyes and regulated my breathing, staying as still as possible while listening for any sounds from Sarah's side of the room. For 3 hours, I heard nothing. No movement, no page turning, no keyboard clicking. Just silence. Around 1 a.m., I risked opening my eyes slightly. Sarah was turned around in her chair, facing my bed, facing me. She wasn't reading or studying. She was just sitting there, hands folded, staring directly at my bed with that same small smile on her face. I could see her eyes in the moonlight coming through the window, wide open, unblinking, fixed on me. I forced myself to keep my breathing steady, to not move, to not let her know I was awake. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. For 2 more hours, she sat there watching me. I never saw her blink once. Around 3 a.m., she finally turned back around to face her desk, but she didn't resume studying or go to bed. She just sat there staring at the wall again. The next morning, I was exhausted and shaken. I asked some friends about their roommate situations, trying to figure out if staying up all night was normal. Everyone assured me it wasn't. Most people mentioned seeing their roommates sleep, hearing them snore, dealing with alarm clocks going off in the morning. I started documenting Sarah's behavior. I kept a small notebook hidden in my backpack and recorded every time I woke up and saw her at the desk. October 15th, 2:30 a.m., sitting and staring. October 16th, 3:15 a.m., sitting and staring. October 18th, 1:45 a.m., turned around watching my bed. That last entry terrified me. She'd been watching me sleep on more than one occasion. I considered talking to my RA about requesting a room change, but I didn't know how to explain the situation without sounding paranoid or crazy. My roommate stays awake all night staring at walls and sometimes watches me sleep. Seemed like something a stressed-out freshman might imagine. Instead, I decided to confront Sarah directly. I waited for a weekend night when I knew we'd both be in the room with no classes the next day. I said around 10 p.m. She looked up from her textbook. "I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. When do you sleep? I've been awake at different times at night for weeks, and I've never seen you sleep." She closed her book carefully and turned to face me completely. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she smiled that same unnatural smile. "I don't need as much sleep as other people," she said. "But everyone needs sleep," she asked, tilting her head slightly. The way she said it made my skin crawl. There was something in her tone, something that suggested she wasn't entirely human. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she had some rare medical condition. Maybe she was taking stimulants to stay awake for studying. I asked, "Adderall or—" "I don't take anything," she interrupted. "I'm just naturally alert." Her smile grew wider. "Over you, of course. I'm your roommate." Every instinct I had screamed that this wasn't normal roommate behavior. Watching someone sleep wasn't protecting them. It was violating them. "That's not normal, Sarah," she asked. She was right, but that didn't make her behavior any less disturbing. I decided I needed to involve someone else. The next day, I went to my RA, Marcus, during his office hours. I tried to explain the situation as calmly as possible. My roommate never seemed to sleep. I'd caught her watching me at night. She claimed she was keeping watch over me. Marcus listened carefully and took notes. He asked. I hesitated. Technically, no, I was the one staying awake to watch her. "Look," Marcus said, "roommate adjustment issues are common first semester. Some people have different sleep schedules." I left his office feeling frustrated and unheard. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Sarah was just a night owl with insomnia who happened to be socially awkward about it. But that night, things got worse. I woke up around 2 a.m. and immediately looked towards Sarah's desk. She wasn't there. Her chair was empty, her bed still made. I sat up and looked around the small room. She wasn't anywhere I could see. Then I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Slow, measured breaths coming from somewhere close to my bed. I turned on my phone's flashlight and nearly screamed. Sarah was standing right next to my bed, maybe 2 feet from where I was lying. Just standing there in her day clothes, hands at her sides, staring down at me with that same unblinking stare. I whispered, my voice shaking. "Watching over you," she said softly. "You looked restless. You can't just stand over people while they sleep, Sarah." "I'm sorry if I startled you," she said, but she didn't move away from my bed. She stood there for another long moment, then slowly walked back to her desk chair. But instead of sitting down, she turned the chair to face my bed directly and sat down, never taking her eyes off me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I started the room change paperwork. I didn't care if I had to sleep in a lounge for weeks. I couldn't stay in a room with someone who stood over me while I slept. But I had one more night to get through before I could meet with housing services. I set up my phone to record video that night, positioning it to capture both my bed and Sarah's area. If she stood over me again, I'd have proof that this wasn't normal roommate behavior. I pretended to fall asleep around midnight, keeping my breathing steady while listening for any movement. Around 1 a.m., I heard Sarah's chair creak softly. I risked opening my eyes just slightly and saw her getting up from her desk. She moved slowly, carefully, making almost no sound as she approached my bed. She stopped right next to me, just like the night before, and stood there watching me. But this time, after about 10 minutes, she did something that made my blood freeze. She reached out her hand toward my face. I felt her fingers hover just inches from my cheek, not quite touching, but close enough that I could sense the warmth of her skin. She held her hand there for what felt like forever, and I had to concentrate on not flinching or changing my breathing pattern. Then she whispered so softly I almost didn't hear it, "Sleep tight." She withdrew her hand and went back to her chair, but this time she didn't sit down. She just stood behind it, hands on the back, staring at my bed for the rest of the night. I submitted my emergency room change request first thing the next morning, along with the video footage. Housing services expedited my case, and I was moved to a different dorm within 2 days. I never found out what happened to Sarah after I left. I heard through friends that she finished the semester in the single room, and she didn't return to campus the following year. Some people said she transferred, others said she dropped out for medical reasons. I still think about her sometimes, especially when I'm alone at night. I wonder if she found someone else to watch over, or if she's still out there somewhere sitting perfectly still in the darkness, staring at nothing with those unblinking eyes. I've had 3 different roommates since then, and I've never slept better than when I can hear them snoring softly in the bed across the room. Normal sounds of normal sleep from normal people, because now I know the difference between someone who's sleeping and someone who's just waiting for you to close your eyes. Story 2. Something was living in our mini fridge. The smell hit me first. That's what I remember most clearly. Sweet and rotten at the same time, like fruit left in a hot car for weeks. I thought maybe my roommate Jake had forgotten about some takeout in our mini fridge. But when I opened it to check, everything looked normal. A few sodas, some string cheese, leftover pizza from 2 days ago. Nothing that should smell like something had died. I was a sophomore at Central State, living in Morrison Hall with Jake, who I'd met through the random roommate matching system. We'd been lucky, we got along well, had similar sleep schedules and split groceries without any drama. Our room was on the 3rd floor corner unit, which gave us slightly more space than most dorms and windows facing both directions. We'd been there exactly 3 days when the smell started. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a faint sweetness in the air that I caught occasionally when I walked past our mini fridge, which sat in the corner between our desks. I figured it was coming from the hallway. Old dorm buildings always had weird smells from decades of students cooking, spilling things, and general college living. But by the second day, the smell was stronger and definitely coming from our room. Jake noticed it too when he got back from his evening economics class. He asked, dropping his backpack and immediately going to open our window. "I thought it was something in the fridge, but I checked," I said. We both investigated together, pulling out every item, checking expiration dates, looking for anything obviously spoiled. The pizza was still good, the cheese wasn't moldy, the sodas were fine. We wiped down all the surfaces, checked the drip tray underneath, even looked behind the fridge for any food that might have fallen back there. Nothing. "Maybe it's coming from next door," Jake suggested. That seemed reasonable. We'd heard our neighbors watching TV and talking on phones plenty of times. If they had some serious food spoilage happening, we might be smelling it through the walls. We went to bed that night with the window cracked open, hoping the smell would dissipate by morning. Instead, it got worse. I woke up around 6 a.m. with the taste of something rotten in my mouth. The smell had gotten so strong overnight that it felt like breathing through wet garbage. Jake was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed with his shirt pulled up over his nose. "This is not normal," he said, his voice muffled by the fabric. "We spent the morning conducting a systematic search of our entire room. We moved furniture, checked behind radiators, looked inside our wardrobes, even lifted our mattresses, thinking maybe something had crawled underneath to die. We found nothing except some dust bunnies and a few coins that had fallen through the bed frames. The smell seemed strongest near the mini fridge, but we'd already checked it twice. Jake suggested we unplug it and see if that helped, so we moved everything to a friend's fridge down the hall and let ours sit empty with the door open. By evening, the smell was still there. Worse, actually. "I'm going to talk to the RA," Jake said. "Maybe there's a dead mouse in the walls or something." Our RA, Michelle, came by with a maintenance guy named Tony who had a flashlight and some basic tools. They spent 20 minutes checking our room, looking in all the same places we'd already searched. "I can definitely smell it," Michelle said, wrinkling her nose. "But I can't find a source." Tony was older, probably in his 50s, and had the weathered look of someone who'd seen every possible dorm disaster over the years. He walked slowly around our room, sniffing like a bloodhound, stopping at different spots to consider. "It's coming from this corner," he said finally, pointing to the area where our mini fridge sat. But not from the fridge itself. He helped us move the fridge completely away from the wall. And that's when we saw it, a gap in the baseboard that hadn't been visible when the fridge was in position. The gap was maybe 3 inches wide and 1 inch tall, just big enough for something small to crawl through. The smell hit us like a physical force when Tony shined his flashlight into the opening. "Oh, that's not good," he muttered, backing away and covering his nose. "We've got something dead in the wall void." Michelle took down our information and promised they'd address it first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, she offered to move us to the lounge for the weekend, but we decided to tough it out with the windows open and some air fresheners. That night, I couldn't sleep. The smell seemed to pulse stronger and weaker in waves, and I kept hearing scratching sounds from inside the walls. Mice, probably, or rats investigating whatever had died back there. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear a new sound, something like claws on wood or tiny feet running across horizontal surfaces. "Yeah." We both lay in our beds, listening to the scratching and skittering sounds coming from inside the wall. It sounded like more than one animal, and they seemed agitated, active. Maybe they were trying to get away from the smell too. Jake asked suddenly, "What if whatever's making the smell isn't dead? What if it's alive and that's just..." That thought was somehow worse than a dead mouse. I tried not to think about what kind of living thing might smell like rotting fruit. The scratching continued for most of the night, and by morning we were both exhausted and nauseated. The smell had gotten so bad that we could taste it constantly, and our clothes reeked from sleeping in the room. We spent Saturday and Sunday at the library and friends' rooms, only returning to our dorm to sleep. But Sunday night, something changed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to Jake shaking my shoulder. "Look at the fridge," he whispered. Our mini fridge was back in its usual spot. We'd left it unplugged and empty in the center of the room, but now it was against the wall again, right over the gap in the baseboard, and the door was closed. I asked, even though I knew he hadn't. "No." We both got up and approached the fridge carefully. The smell was overwhelming now, so strong it made our eyes water. Jake reached for the handle to open the door. "Wait," I said. He pulled the door open and we both stumbled backward. The fridge was full of food, not our food. We'd moved everything out days ago. This was different food, arranged neatly on the shelves, fruits and vegetables that looked fresh but smelled absolutely putrid. Meat packages that were the wrong color, dairy products with expiration dates that were impossible to read because the printing seemed to move when you looked at it directly. And everything was moving slightly. Not like it was alive, but like there was something underneath each item, shifting and rearranging from below. Jake slammed the door shut. "We're leaving," he said. We grabbed our phones and some clothes and went straight to Michelle's room. I don't think either of us slept for the rest of the night. Monday morning brought facilities staff, maintenance workers, and an exterminator with serious equipment. But they also found something else. Tony pulled me aside while the other workers were cleaning up. "This might sound weird," he said, "but we found fresh food scraps back there too. Like, really fresh. Banana peels, apple cores, pieces of bread. That's what we thought at first. But here's the thing. We found your mini fridge full of food this morning when we moved it." I didn't know what to say to that. "Look," Tony continued, "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've seen some weird stuff in these old dorms. Sometimes things happen that don't make complete sense. My advice? They sealed the wall gap with steel mesh and new baseboard, thoroughly cleaned and sanitized our entire room, and provided us with a new mini fridge. The smell disappeared completely and we never heard scratching in the walls again. But for the rest of that semester, neither Jake nor I could bring ourselves to put food in the new fridge. We kept everything in a cooler with ice packs or stored things in friends' rooms down the hall. Because sometimes late at night we'd hear faint sounds from behind the wall where they'd sealed everything up. Not scratching this time, but something softer, like chewing or whispers. And once, just once, I woke up to find our empty fridge standing open in the middle of the night, even though we'd made sure to keep it closed and unplugged. I never told Jake about that. Story 3. My roommate had been dead for 3 days. I lived with Jake's corpse for 72 hours and never knew. The coroner told me later that's how long he'd been dead when I finally found him. 3 days of brushing my teeth 3 feet from his decomposing body. 3 days of doing homework while he rotted in his bed. 3 days of saying "Good night, Jake" to someone who couldn't hear me anymore. I still can't process how I didn't know. Jake Mitchell was my roommate second semester sophomore year at Valley College. We'd met through the mid-year housing placement system when my original roommate transferred schools after Christmas break. Jake needed a place too. His previous roommate had graduated early, leaving him alone in a double room he couldn't afford to keep as a single. He seemed like a decent guy when we met at housing services to sign the paperwork. Quiet, studious, pre-law major from Ohio. He kept his side of our room in Whitman Hall neat, didn't party much, and always said please and thank you when we shared food or borrowed each other's stuff. We weren't close friends, but we coexisted comfortably in our small shared space. The spring semester routine worked well for both of us. I had early classes, 8 a.m. economics and 9:30 a.m. statistics, so I'd be up and out by 7:15 most mornings. Jake's schedule was heavier in the afternoon and evening, with seminars that often ran until 8 or 9 p.m. We'd usually cross paths briefly when I returned from dinner and he was heading to his night classes. Our bedtime routines became predictably friendly. I'd get back from the library around 10 p.m., and he'd either be at his desk studying or already in bed reading. We'd exchange basic pleasantries. How was your day? Got any big assignments due? Did you remember to pay the electricity bill? Normal roommate stuff. Then we'd both go to sleep, him in his bed by the window, me in mine by the door. The first week of February, Jake started sleeping more. Not unusual for college students. Midterms were coming up, everyone was stressed, and the winter weather made it tempting to stay under warm blankets instead of trudging across campus to class. I figured he was just tired. When I'd leave for my 8 a.m. class, I'd see Jake still asleep in his bed, covers pulled up to his chin, facing the wall. He'd always been a deep sleeper, so I'd try to be quiet, gathering my books and backpack. Being a considerate roommate, you know? He started missing his morning classes, which wasn't completely unusual either. Jake had mentioned struggling with his constitutional law seminar, and I knew he'd been staying up late working on a major research paper. I assumed he was prioritizing sleep over less important attendance requirements. But after 4 or 5 days of him sleeping through multiple alarms and missing both morning and afternoon classes, I started to worry. Not enough to do anything dramatic, just enough to pay more attention to his patterns. That's when I realized I hadn't actually seen Jake awake in almost a week. Every morning when I left, asleep in bed, same position, covers pulled up. Every evening when I returned, asleep in bed, same position, covers pulled up. Late at night when I went to sleep, asleep in bed, same position, covers pulled up. The notes would still be there the next day, untouched. His alarm clock kept going off every morning at 7 a.m. I'd hit the snooze button for him so it wouldn't wake up our neighbors, figuring he'd get up eventually and turn it off himself. But it would just keep going off every 9 minutes until I finally turned it off completely around 8:30 when I left for class. I considered waking him up directly, but I didn't want to be the overbearing roommate who couldn't mind his own business. Jake was an adult, capable of managing his own schedule and health. If he wanted to sleep for 16 hours a day, that was his choice. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe he was sick with mono or the flu. Maybe he was going through family problems and needed space to process. I didn't want to violate his privacy by forcing conversation he might not want to have. The smell started on day 6 or 7, but I didn't connect it to Jake. It was subtle at first, a slightly sour organic smell that I attributed to our room needing better ventilation. Old dorm buildings got stuffy in winter when windows stayed closed for months. I started leaving our window cracked open during the day and bought some air freshener to spray around before bed. Our room was small, maybe 12 by 14 feet, with our beds pushed against opposite walls and our desks in between. Jake's bed was positioned so that when he slept facing the wall, I could only see the back of his head and the mound of his body under the covers. I never had a clear view of his face while he was sleeping. On the 8th day, I finally worked up the courage to wake him up. He'd missed his midterm exam in constitutional law. I knew because his study group had stopped by looking for him and they seemed genuinely concerned about his absence. "Jake," I said softly, standing next to his bed around 3 p.m. He didn't respond. The covers rose and fell slightly so I could tell he was breathing. I reached out and gently shook his shoulder through the blanket. "Jake, your study group came by." Nothing, but I could feel the solid mass of his body under the covers and the slight movement that suggested deep sleep. I didn't want to shake him harder and risk seeming aggressive or invasive. I left another note on his desk. "Your study group stopped by. They're concerned." That night, I lay in bed listening for any sounds from his side of the room. I heard what I thought might be shifting or movement around 2 a.m., which relieved me. Maybe he was finally waking up, getting some water, using the bathroom. Maybe tomorrow he'd be back to normal. The next morning, he was in the exact same position. By day 9, the smell had gotten noticeably worse, and I was starting to panic. I'd been trying to respect Jake's privacy and autonomy. But this wasn't normal sleep behavior. This was something medical, something serious, something that required intervention. I decided I'd wake him up properly when I got back from my afternoon class, even if it meant being pushy about it. If he was sick enough to sleep for 9 days straight, he needed medical attention. I returned to our room around 4 p.m., dropped my backpack, and walked straight to Jake's bed with determination. "Jake," I said firmly, reaching out to shake his shoulder. "Jake, I'm worried about you." My hand landed on his shoulder, and I knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. He was cold, not cool like someone sleeping under insufficient blankets, but cold, like meat from a refrigerator. And solid in a way that living bodies aren't solid, rigid. I jerked my hand back and stumbled away from his bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I whispered, even though I already knew he couldn't hear me. I reached out again, this time pulling the covers down from his face. What I saw will never leave my memory. His skin was gray-blue and waxy. His eyes were open but clouded over, staring at nothing. His mouth was slightly open, and there were dark stains on the pillow around his head. The smell that had been building for days hit me full force, the unmistakable odor of decomposition. I ran out of the room and straight to our RA's door, pounding until she answered. "Call 911, I said, barely able to get the words out. The next several hours were a blur of paramedics, police officers, detectives, and crime scene investigators. They asked me questions I couldn't answer satisfactorily. When did I last see him alive? When did I last have a conversation with him? How long had he been in that position? I kept telling them I didn't know. I thought he was sleeping. I thought he was just tired or sick or depressed. I never thought he was dead. The coroner's preliminary assessment was that Jake had died of natural causes, a previously undiagnosed heart condition that caused cardiac arrest while he slept. He'd been dead for approximately 72 hours when I found him. 72 hours. 3 days of me living normally in a room with his corpse. 3 days of me saying goodnight to a dead body. 3 days of me being considerate about noise levels so I wouldn't wake someone who was never going to wake up. The police asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about his behavior before he died. I told them about the increased sleeping, the missed classes, the unanswered notes. They said depression and social withdrawal were common among college students, and that Jake's behavior in his final days hadn't been obviously alarming to anyone. His parents arrived the next day to collect his belongings. His mother kept apologizing to me, saying she was sorry I'd had to go through finding him, sorry I'd been living with the situation without knowing. She said Jake had struggled with anxiety and had been seeing a counselor, but that no one knew about any heart problems. "He always seemed so healthy," she said through tears. "He played soccer in high school." The university moved me to a different room immediately and offered counseling services, which I accepted. The counselor said what I was experiencing was a form of trauma, that discovering a dead body, especially someone you lived with, could have lasting psychological effects. But what bothered me most wasn't the discovery itself. It was the realization of how disconnected I'd been from someone I shared 12 square feet with every day. How had I not known? How had I convinced myself that someone sleeping in the exact same position for 9 days was normal? How had I rationalized the smell, the missed classes, the complete lack of response to my attempts at communication? How had I said goodnight to a corpse and never questioned why he didn't say goodnight back? I started obsessing over the details, trying to reconstruct exactly when Jake had died. The coroner said it happened sometime late on February 12th or early February 13th. I remember February 12th clearly. I'd gotten back from dinner around 7 p.m. and Jake was already in bed. I said, "Night, Jake," like I always did. He didn't respond, but that wasn't unusual. He was often tired or distracted. That might have been when he was already dead. I might have been saying goodnight to someone who had died hours earlier. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd think about those 3 days. All the moments when I was brushing my teeth, getting dressed, doing homework, talking on the phone with my parents, all while Jake's body was decomposing 6 feet away from me. I'd think about how I'd been careful to be quiet in the mornings, so I wouldn't disturb his sleep. I'd think about how I'd bought air freshener to mask the smell of his decay without realizing what it was. I'd think about how I'd written him notes asking if he was okay while he was past the point of ever being okay again. The worst part is that even now, 3 years later, I sometimes doubt my own memory. Did I really not know? Was there some part of me that suspected something was wrong but chose to ignore it because confronting it would have been too difficult? I've had 6 different roommates since then, and I check on all of them obsessively. If someone sleeps past noon, I wake them up. If someone doesn't respond to a direct question, I don't let it go. If someone seems off or different, I ask intrusive questions until I'm satisfied they're okay. Because I never want to live with death again without knowing it. I never want to say goodnight to someone who can't hear me. I never want to be that oblivious to something that important happening 3 feet away from me. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and have to check that my current roommate is breathing. I know it's not rational, but I can't help myself. I have to know they're alive. I have to know I'm not living with a corpse again. Story 4, the girl who kept trying my door at 3 a.m. Every night at exactly 3 a.m., someone tried to get into my room. I'd lie there in the darkness watching my door handle turn slowly in the moonlight, listening to fingernails scratch against the wood like an animal trying to claw its way inside. The scratching is what I remember most clearly, deliberate, patient, persistent, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. I was a freshman at Northern State, living in Patterson Hall on the 4th floor, single room, which I'd requested specifically because I was a light sleeper and worried about roommate conflicts. The room was small but comfortable, just big enough for a twin bed, desk, dresser, and a narrow window that looked out over the campus quad. My door was solid wood with an old-fashioned brass handle and a deadbolt lock that I used religiously. Growing up in a small town, I'd never been security conscious, but something about dorm life made me feel vulnerable. Hundreds of students with keys to the building, parties happening at all hours, people I didn't know wandering the hallways drunk at 2 a.m. The first time it happened was during my second week of classes in September. I'd been asleep for maybe 3 hours when something woke me up. Not a sound exactly, but that instinctual feeling that someone was nearby. I opened my eyes and lay still, listening. Then I heard it, the slow, careful turn of my door handle, Someone was trying to get into my room. My heart started pounding as I watched the brass handle rotate clockwise, pause, then rotate back. The person on the other side was being quiet about it, but not quiet enough. I could hear the metal mechanism clicking softly as they tested whether the door was locked. It was locked, of course. I always locked it. After maybe 30 seconds of gentle testing, the handle stopped moving. I waited, barely breathing, for footsteps moving away down the hallway. Instead, I heard scratching, fingernails against wood starting at about waist height and moving slowly downward. Like someone was running their nails down the outside of my door in long, deliberate strokes. The sound made my teeth ache. I grabbed my phone to check the time, 3:17 a.m. The scratching continued for another minute or two, then stopped abruptly. I heard footsteps finally moving away, soft, like someone walking in socks or bare feet. I lay awake for the rest of the night, listening for any other sounds, but the hallway stayed quiet. The next morning, I examined my door carefully. There were faint scratch marks in the wood, mostly near the bottom where the scratching had moved downward. Nothing deep enough to be called damage, but visible if you knew what to look for. I mentioned it to my RA, Derek, during lunch. "Someone tried to get into my room last night," I said. Derek frowned. "Are you sure?" He looked skeptical. Could have been someone who was drunk and confused about which room was theirs. That seemed plausible. Patterson Hall had identical doors every 10 feet down long corridors. A drunk student could easily mistake 414 for 404 or 424. "If it happens again, call campus security immediately," Derek said. I felt better having told someone, and I convinced myself it had been a one-time incident, some drunk sophomore who'd gotten confused about floor numbers, but it happened again the next night and the night after that. Always at 3 a.m. Always the same pattern. Slow testing of the door handle, followed by that deliberate scratching sound moving down the length of the door. After the third night, I started staying awake to watch for it. I'd set a quiet alarm for 2:55 a.m. and position myself where I could see the door clearly in the moonlight from my window. At exactly 3 a.m., the handle would start to turn. I never saw a shadow under the door or heard approaching footsteps. Whoever was doing this moved silently until they reached my door, then spent several minutes testing the lock and scratching at the wood. On the fourth night, I worked up the courage to speak. I called out when the scratching started. The sound stopped immediately. I waited for a response, an apology, an explanation, anything. Instead, the scratching resumed, but louder and more aggressive. Like whoever was out there was angry that I'd acknowledged their presence. I called campus security from my room phone while the scratching was still happening. "Someone is trying to break into my room," I whispered. "Right now. Stay on the line." I stayed on the phone, listening to the scratching continue for another 2 minutes. Then it stopped abruptly, and I heard those soft footsteps moving away. Officer Martinez arrived about 5 minutes later. He was a middle-aged man with a serious expression and a thorough way of examining everything. He looked at my door, noting the scratch marks, and checked the hallway for any signs of who might have been there. "The scratches are definitely fresh," he said, "and they match the pattern you described." He took my statement and promised to increase patrols on the 4th floor, especially around 3 a.m. I asked. "Not to my knowledge," he said. That gave me some comfort. If it was happening to other people too, it was probably just someone with a psychological problem who needed help, not someone specifically targeting me. But when I followed up with Derek the next day, he said no one else had reported anything unusual. "You're the only one," he said. "Are you sure you're not having vivid dreams?" I showed him the scratch marks on my door. He examined the marks, clearly troubled. "I'll talk to the other RAs and see if anyone's noticed suspicious behavior." I didn't want to be driven out of my own room by some creep with fingernail fetish, so I decided to gather more evidence. I set up my phone to record video, positioning it to capture both the door and the timestamp. That night, I caught everything. At exactly 3 a.m., my door handle began to turn. The video showed the brass knob rotating slowly clockwise, pausing, then rotating back. After about 30 seconds, the scratching started. Long vertical scrapes moving from the middle of the door down toward the bottom. But here's what disturbed me most. I couldn't see anyone in the hallway. My door had a gap of maybe half an inch at the bottom. If someone was standing outside scratching at the wood, I should have been able to see their feet or the shadow of their legs in the hallway light. There was nothing. The door handle turned and the scratching happened, but I couldn't see any evidence of a person causing it. I showed the video to campus security the next morning. Officer Martinez watched it 3 times, his expression getting more concerned each time. "This is unusual," he said finally. "The door handle is definitely moving and you can hear the scratching clearly. It could mean someone is crouching very low or lying on the floor." Neither of those explanations seemed likely, but I didn't have better theories. "We're going to set up surveillance in your hallway," Officer Martinez said. "Hidden camera focused on your door." The surveillance camera was installed the next day, positioned at the end of the hallway with a clear view of my door. I felt safer knowing that whatever happened would be recorded from multiple angles. That night, I watched my door as usual. At 3 a.m., the handle started turning, but this time I decided to do something different. Instead of just watching and waiting, I walked quietly to my door and put my hand on the deadbolt, ready to unlock it quickly and confront whoever was out there. The scratching started and I could feel vibrations through the door from the fingernails scraping against the wood on the other side. I counted to 3, then quickly unlocked the deadbolt and yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. Completely, impossibly empty. No person crouching, no person running away, no person anywhere within sight in either direction. The hallway was well lit by overhead fluorescents, and I could see clearly to the stairwells at both ends, but I could still hear the scratching. It was coming from my door, but now from the inside surface, like someone was scratching at the wood from within my room. I spun around and saw nothing in my room either. Just my furniture, my belongings, my bed. But the scratching sound continued, seeming to come from the door itself. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. The scratching stopped immediately. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Officer Martinez reviewed the surveillance footage with me. The timestamp showed 3:00 a.m. exactly, and we could see my door clearly. "There," I said, pointing at the screen. We watched my door handle turn just like in my phone video. We could see the door shake slightly from the scratching, and at 3:07 a.m. we could see me opening the door and looking out into the hallway. But we couldn't see anyone else. Not in the hallway, not near my door, not anywhere. "This doesn't make sense," Officer Martinez muttered. He rewound the footage and played it again in slow motion, looking for any detail we might have missed. Nothing. "I want to move rooms," I told Derek that afternoon. "Let me see what I can do," he said. By evening, Derek had found me a room on the 2nd floor. A double room with a roommate named Ashley who was welcoming and understanding when I explained I was having security issues with my previous room. I moved my belongings that same day, grateful to be away from room 414 and whatever was happening there. For 3 nights, I slept peacefully in my new room. No sounds at 3 a.m., no scratching, no door handle turning. I started to relax, convincing myself that the problem was specific to that room or that floor. On the 4th night in my new room, I woke up at 2:58 a.m. I don't know what woke me, but I was instantly alert, staring at our door in the darkness. At exactly 3 a.m., The handle began to turn. Ashley was asleep in the bed next to mine, breathing deeply. I wanted to wake her, to have a witness, but I was frozen with the realization that changing rooms hadn't solved anything. Whatever was trying to get into my space had found me again. The scratching started, and I recognized the same deliberate pattern, the same patient rhythm, like fingernails moving down wood in long, purposeful strokes. I lay there listening, understanding that this wasn't about a specific room or building. This was about me. Something was following me, trying to get to me, and locked doors weren't going to stop it. I never found out what it was or why it chose me. I transferred to a different school after that semester. But even now, 3 years later, I wake up sometimes at 3 a.m. and check my door handle. Just to make sure it's not turning. Just to make sure whatever was scratching at my door in Patterson Hall hasn't found me again. Story 5. I found photos of myself sleeping. I've always been a deep sleeper. My mom used to joke that the house could burn down around me and I wouldn't wake up until the fire department carried me outside. 3 alarm clocks, phone calls, people shaking my shoulder. Nothing could penetrate my sleep once I was out. I thought it was a blessing, especially living in a dorm where parties and noise complaints were constant. I never imagined someone could use my deep sleep against me. I was a junior at State, living in Carpenter Hall in what was supposed to be a single room. It was small but comfortable, with thick walls that blocked out most hallway noise. My room was on the second floor corner unit, with windows facing the parking lot rather than the busy main campus area. I'd specifically requested a quiet location because I needed solid sleep to manage my course load in biochemistry. The first strange thing I noticed was my phone. I'd always been careful about plugging it in before bed, and I had a specific routine. Phone goes on the charger on the left side of my desk, screen facing down. But I started waking up to find it moved. Not dramatically moved, just shifted. Maybe on the right side of the desk instead of the left, or screen facing up instead of down. At first I figured I was misremembering. When you're tired and going through the motions of getting ready for bed, it's easy to think you did something one way when you actually did it another. I made a mental note to pay more attention but didn't think much of it. Then I noticed my shoes. I'm particular about how I arrange my shoes when I take them off. I line them up parallel to each other, toes pointing toward the wall. Right shoe on the right, left shoe on the left. It's a habit I developed in high school when my mom got tired of tripping over shoes left in random places. But I started waking up to find my shoes turned around. Toes pointing away from the wall, or switched so the left shoe was on the right side. Small changes, but definite changes that didn't match my routine. I began to wonder if I was sleepwalking. I'd never done it before, but college stress could trigger all kinds of new behaviors. Maybe I was getting up in the night and moving things around without remembering. The third week of September, I noticed my laptop. I always closed it completely before going to sleep and positioned it in the center of my desk, parallel to the edge. But I woke up one morning to find it open about halfway, angled toward my bed like someone had been using it and hadn't quite closed it all the way. That bothered me more than the phone and shoes because my laptop required a password to access anything. If I was sleepwalking and using my computer, I'd have to be entering my password while unconscious, which seemed unlikely. I checked my browser history and recent files. Nothing unusual, no late-night searches, no documents opened or created, no emails sent. If someone had been using my laptop, they hadn't left obvious traces. But the next morning I found it open again, and this time, there was a file on my desktop that hadn't been there before. The file was named Sleep Study and contained a single folder with no contents. When I tried to open the folder, it appeared empty. but the properties showed it contained several gigabytes of data. I ran a virus scan and checked for hidden files. The scan came back clean and I couldn't find any hidden content in the folder. But the data was definitely there, taking up space on my hard drive. I was starting to feel paranoid, so I decided to set up a test. Before going to bed that night, I arranged my room very deliberately and took photos with my phone to document the exact placement of everything. Phone on left side of desk, screen down, shoes parallel, toes toward wall, laptop closed and centered. I even put a piece of tape across my laptop lid so I'd know if it had been opened. When I woke up, everything was moved again. Phone on right side, screen up. Shoes turned around, laptop open, tape broken, angled toward my bed, and there were new files on my desktop, JPG, and so on. But when I tried to open them, they wouldn't load properly. The image viewer would show error messages or display corrupted data that looked like static. I was convinced someone was breaking into my room while I slept, but I couldn't figure out how. My door had a deadbolt that I used religiously, and my windows were on the second floor with no fire escape or easy access from outside. Campus security had assured me that dorm rooms were secure and there had been no reports of break-ins in Carpenter Hall. I decided to stay awake one night and watch for intruders. I set up position in my desk chair around midnight, facing my door with a clear view of the windows as well. I had my phone ready to call security and a baseball bat within reach. Probably overkill, but I was scared and wanted to be prepared. For 6 hours, I sat there watching. Nothing happened. No sounds from the hallway, no movement at the windows, no one trying my door handle. At 6 a.m., exhausted and feeling foolish, I finally went to sleep. When I woke up at noon, everything in my room had been moved again. Somehow, in the 6 hours I'd been asleep after staying awake all night, someone had still managed to get into my room and rearrange my belongings. But this time, they'd left something obvious. There was an SD card sitting on my keyboard. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. It was a standard micro SD card, the kind used in digital cameras with no identifying marks or labels. I almost threw it away without looking at what was on it. Part of me knew that whatever I found would be worse than not knowing, but I needed to understand what was happening to me. I put the SD card into my laptop's adapter and opened the folder that appeared. There were 847 image files, all photos of me sleeping. The first few were taken from across the room, showing my entire bed and my body under the covers. The timestamps showed they'd been taken over 6 weeks, starting shortly after I'd moved into the room. Multiple photos each night, sometimes dozens. As I scrolled through the images, they became progressively closer and more detailed. Photos of my face from 2 feet away, close-ups of my hands resting on the pillow. Pictures taken from directly above me, as if someone had been standing over my bed. The most recent photos were so close I could see the pores on my skin and individual eyelashes. Someone had been inches from my face while I slept, taking high-resolution photographs, and I had never woken up once. In some of the photos, I could see my room around me, my desk, my dresser, my belongings. But everything was arranged differently than how I'd left it, confirming that someone had been moving my things each night before photographing me. The worst part was that in several photos I could see my own hands and feet positioned differently than how I normally slept. Someone had been moving my body, arranging me like a doll, posing me for photographs. And I had slept through all of it. I ran out of my room with the SD card and went straight to campus security. Officer Williams, a woman in her 40s who'd been working campus security for years, listened to my story with increasing concern as she asked, reviewing some of the images on my laptop. "Yes, you can see my furniture, my belongings." "Never." Officer Williams frowned at the timestamps on the photos. This shows systematic intrusion over more than a month. How is that possible? There are several possibilities. Someone could have a duplicate key, someone with access to master keys, someone who's learned to pick your lock. She arranged for a complete security assessment of my room. Locksmiths changed my deadbolt and checked for signs of tampering. Maintenance examined my windows for evidence of forced entry. They dusted for fingerprints on my belongings and around potential entry points. The results were puzzling. No evidence of lockpicking or forced entry. No fingerprints except mine. No signs that anyone had climbed through the windows from outside. "It's like whoever did this was invisible," Officer Williams said. "They moved me to a different room immediately in a different building, with new locks and a roommate for added security. But the experience had fundamentally changed how I thought about sleep and safety. I couldn't stop thinking about all those nights when someone had been in my room moving my unconscious body, taking photographs of me in my most vulnerable state. How many times had they touched me? What else had they done while I was unconscious that wasn't captured in photographs?" The investigation continued for weeks, but they never found who had been taking the pictures. The SD card had no identifiable metadata beyond the timestamps. Campus security reviewed footage from hallway cameras but found no evidence of anyone entering or leaving my room during the relevant time periods. "Whoever did this knew how to avoid detection," Officer Williams told me. The case was eventually referred to local police, who opened an investigation into breaking and entering and invasion of privacy, but without suspects or evidence pointing to a specific person. There was little they could do beyond increasing patrols and recommending that I remain vigilant. I finished that semester in the new room with a roommate named Jessica, who was understanding about my need to check locks multiple times before bed and my insistence on keeping a lamp on all night. I never slept as deeply as I used to. Even now, 2 years later, I have trouble sleeping in unfamiliar places. I set up motion-activated cameras in my apartment. I check my belongings every morning to make sure nothing's been moved. And I wake up multiple times each night to scan my room for intruders. Because I know now that someone can be inches from your face, touching you, photographing you, and you might never know it happened. I know that your deepest sleep can be someone else's opportunity to violate you in ways you can't even imagine. And I know that 847 photographs means 847 separate times when someone was in my room while I was unconscious and vulnerable. I still have nightmares about what might have happened in between those photographs, in the moments when the camera wasn't clicking. What else did they do while I slept? I'll probably never know, and that uncertainty is almost worse than the photographs themselves. Story 6. The shared bathroom on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor bathroom in Morrison Hall had 10 shower stalls, 5 on each side of a narrow tiled corridor that always smelled like mold and cheap disinfectant. I preferred showering there late at night around 11 p.m. or midnight, when most people were in their rooms studying or getting ready for bed. The privacy was worth walking up an extra flight of stairs from my 2nd floor room. I thought I was alone in there. I thought the wet footprints I kept seeing were just my imagination, and that the breathing sounds were echoes or water moving through old pipes. I was wrong about all of it. Morrison Hall was an old dorm built in the 1960s with the kind of institutional architecture that prioritized function over comfort. The bathroom on the 3rd floor was typical of the era. White subway tiles on the walls, cracked linoleum floors, metal shower stalls with frosted plastic doors that didn't quite reach the floor. There was a gap of about 4 inches at the bottom of each stall door, supposedly for ventilation, and to prevent people from getting trapped if the door mechanism jammed. I'd been using that bathroom regularly since October. My floor's bathroom was always crowded and the hot water ran out quickly when multiple people showered at the same time. The third floor seemed less populated, and I could usually shower without waiting or rushing. My routine was consistent. Finish studying around 10:30 p.m., gather my shower supplies, walk upstairs, and enjoy a long, hot shower with no interruptions. The bathroom was almost always empty when I arrived, and I'd have my pick of stalls. I preferred the middle stall on the left side because it had the best water pressure and the shower head was positioned at the right height. The stall next to it, closest to the window, had always seemed unused whenever I was there. The door stayed closed, but I assumed it was just the way the door hung when no one was using it. The first time I noticed something odd was in early November. I'd been showering for maybe 10 minutes when I heard what sounded like water running in the stall next to mine. Just the faint sound of a shower being turned on and water hitting tile. I figured someone else had come in while I was shampooing and hadn't heard them over the sound of my own shower. It happens in communal bathrooms. People come and go without much noise, especially late at night when everyone's trying to be considerate of sleeping neighbors. But when I finished my shower and stepped out of the stall, I was the only person in the bathroom. All the other stall doors were open except for the one next to where I'd been showering. That door was closed and I could still hear water running inside. I called out. No response. I walked closer to the closed stall and noticed water seeping out from under the door. More water than you'd expect from normal splashing. It looked like the drain might be clogged and water was pooling on the floor. I knocked gently on the plastic door. "Hey, your drain might be backed up." Still no response, but the water kept running. I considered getting the RA to check on the situation. But it was nearly midnight and I didn't want to make a big deal about a potentially clogged drain. Maintenance could handle it in the morning. I gathered my things and left, but the incident stuck with me. Something had felt off about the whole situation. The timing of the shower starting, the lack of response to my questions, the amount of water on the floor. The next night, I paid more attention when I arrived at the bathroom. All the stall doors were open, including the problematic one from the night before. I checked inside that stall and found it completely dry, with no signs of drainage problems. I took my usual stall and started my shower routine. About 15 minutes in, I heard the water start running in the stall next to me again. This time I was determined to see who was using it. I quickly rinsed the soap from my hair and quietly turned off my water, listening carefully for sounds of movement from the next stall. I heard water running, but I also heard something else. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that was audible even over the sound of the shower. Someone was definitely in there, but they weren't moving around the way you'd expect someone to move while washing. The breathing sounded stationary, like someone standing perfectly still under the running water. I finished my shower quickly and stepped out, wrapping my towel around myself before walking over to the occupied stall. "Excuse me," I said, speaking toward the closed door. No response, but I could still hear the breathing and the water. I bent down and looked under the gap at the bottom of the door. I could see feet, bare feet, standing in the middle of the stall, not moving. Just standing there in the running water, facing toward my direction. I said again, louder this time. The feet didn't move, but the breathing stopped abruptly. Then I heard the shower turn off and the feet shifted slightly. I straightened up and backed away from the door, waiting for whoever was inside to come out and explain why they'd been standing motionless in the shower. I waited for 5 minutes. The stall door never opened. Finally, I approached the door again and bent down to look under the gap. The feet were gone. The stall appeared empty, but the door was still closed from the inside. I pushed gently on the door and found it wouldn't budge. It was definitely latched from within, but there was no one visible inside the stall. I went straight to my RA's room and knocked until he answered. "There's something wrong with the third-floor bathroom," I said. My RA, Kevin, was a senior who dealt with plenty of weird dorm situations. He grabbed his master keys and followed me upstairs to investigate. When we got to the bathroom, the problematic stall door was standing open. Kevin asked, looking around the empty bathroom. I pointed to the stall that had been locked. "That one." Kevin examined the stall carefully, checking the door mechanism and looking for signs of malfunction. "The latch works fine," he said. "I'm sure." We checked every stall, every corner, every possible hiding place in the bathroom. We were the only people there. "Look," Kevin said. "These old buildings have weird acoustics. Sounds from other floors or other rooms can echo in strange ways." I wanted to believe his explanations, but I knew what I'd seen and heard. What about the feet? Could have been shadows or reflections from the lights. Kevin was trying to be helpful, but I could tell he thought I was overreacting or misinterpreting normal phenomena. "I'll file a report with maintenance about the door latch," he said. I followed his advice for the rest of the week, but the bathroom on my floor was crowded and inconvenient. By the following Monday, I was back to my late-night routine on the third floor. For several days, nothing unusual happened. I showered alone, no mysterious sounds from other stalls, no wet footprints or closed doors. I started to think Kevin had been right about acoustics and door mechanisms. But then it happened again, and this time it was worse. I was in my usual stall, washing my hair, when I heard the familiar sound of water starting in the stall next to me. I'd learned to ignore it, assuming it was some quirk of the building's plumbing. But then I heard splashing. Not the normal splashing of someone moving around while showering, but rhythmic splashing like someone slapping the water with their hands. Over and over in a steady pattern that went on for several minutes. I turned off my shower and listened more carefully. The splashing stopped, but now I could hear breathing again. That same slow, deliberate breathing I'd heard before. Against my better judgment, I bent down to look under the stall door. The feet were there again, but this time they were facing away from me. And they were moving, shifting weight from one foot to the other in a slow, rocking motion. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, mesmerized by the strange, swaying movement. Then the feet stopped moving and slowly turned to face my direction. I jerked back up, my heart pounding. Whoever was in there had known I was watching and had turned to face me. I grabbed my towel and shower supplies and headed for the door, not bothering to get fully dressed. Behind me, I heard the shower in the other stall turn off. I glanced back and saw water flowing out from under the closed stall door, much more water than should come from a normal shower. In the hallway, I ran into Kevin, who was doing his nightly rounds. "The third-floor bathroom again," I said, still dripping and barely covered by my towel. Kevin sighed but followed me back to the bathroom. When we entered, the problematic stall door was open and the floor was completely dry. "I don't see any water," Kevin said. "It was here 5 seconds ago." Kevin walked through the entire bathroom, checking each stall and examining the floors. Everything was normal. "Maybe you should consider talking to counseling services," he suggested gently. I knew he was trying to be supportive, but his suggestion made me feel like he thought I was having some kind of mental health crisis. The next morning, I went to maintenance services directly and asked them to check the third-floor bathroom in Morrison Hall. "We've had reports of drainage problems and door malfunctions," I told the maintenance supervisor. 2 maintenance workers went up to investigate and returned 20 minutes later with a report that disturbed me more than Kevin's skepticism had. "We found something interesting," one of them said. "That corner stall has been locked from the inside for over 2 weeks. The latch mechanism is engaged from within the stall, but we can't see anyone inside. They returned that afternoon with tools and dismantled the door of the problematic stall. Inside, they found the stall was completely normal, clean, dry, functional. But there was no explanation for how the door had become latched from the inside with no one in the stall to latch it. "Must be a mechanical malfunction," the maintenance supervisor concluded. They replaced the door latch with a new mechanism and declared the problem solved. But I never showered on the third floor again. Because even though maintenance had found a rational explanation for the locked door, they hadn't explained the breathing, the feet, the splashing, or the water flowing out from under the door. And I couldn't shake the feeling that removing the door had disturbed something that had been living in that stall. Something that had been watching me shower through the gap at the bottom of the door, something that might now be looking for a new place to hide. I still avoid communal bathrooms when possible, and when I have to use them, I check under every stall door before I undress. Because I know that sometimes the stall next to yours isn't empty, even when it appears to be. And sometimes the breathing you hear isn't coming from the pipes. Story 7. My roommate's girlfriend didn't exist. Marcus talked about Emma constantly. How they'd met in high school, how she was studying at a college 3 hours away, how they texted all day and called every night before bed. He showed me photos on his phone, a pretty brunette with a bright smile, always in different locations that looked like a typical college campus. Emma at the library, Emma at a coffee shop, Emma with friends I didn't recognize. I thought it was sweet how devoted he was to maintaining a long-distance relationship. I never questioned why I'd never met her in person, or why she only visited our dorm room when I was out. Some couples prefer privacy, and I respected that. I had no reason to doubt that Emma was real until his mother told me the truth. Marcus and I had been roommates for 3 months when his parents came for the November family weekend. I'd met them briefly during move-in day. Nice middle-class people from a small town about 2 hours north of campus. His mother, Carol, was the kind of parent who brought homemade cookies and asked detailed questions about our classes and meal plans. While Marcus was giving his dad a tour of the campus, Carol and I were alone in our room. She was examining Marcus's side of the room with the careful attention that mothers pay to their children's living spaces, noting photos on his desk and textbooks on his shelves. "He seems to be adjusting well to college," she said, picking up one of the framed photos from his desk. It showed Marcus with his arm around Emma, both of them smiling at a restaurant. "Yeah, he's doing great," I said. "Really focused on his studies, but still social." Carol's expression changed immediately. She set down the photo and looked at me with concern. They talk every day." Carol sat down on Marcus's bed and gestured for me to sit across from her. I laughed, thinking she was joking or maybe just hadn't been told about the relationship. "He talks about her all the time. There was a girl named Emma in Marcus's high school class," Carol said carefully. "Emma Rodriguez." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at Carol, trying to process what she'd just told me. "That's not possible," I said. "I've seen current photos. They text constantly." Carol's eyes filled with tears. "Emma was Marcus's girlfriend junior and senior year. He was devastated when she died. He barely graduated, barely functioned for months afterward." She trailed off, looking around the room with new understanding. "Well, I've never actually met her in person," I admitted, "but Marcus talks about their visits all the time." Carol pulled out her phone and showed me a news article from 2 years ago. Below was a photo of the same girl I'd seen in Marcus's pictures, Emma Rodriguez, age 18. "The accident happened on a rainy night in May," Carol explained. "Emma was driving home from Marcus's house after dinner with our family." I felt sick. For 3 months, I'd been listening to Marcus talk about his relationship with someone who was dead. I asked. "Of course he knows. He was at the funeral. He spoke at the service. Carol explained that Marcus had been seeing a counselor before college and that his parents had been concerned about him living away from home so soon after the trauma. "We thought the structure and social environment of college would be good for him," she said. We sat in silence for a moment, both trying to understand the implications. I asked, "Don't confront him directly about this," Carol said. "Let us handle it with his counselor." After Marcus and his dad returned from the campus tour, I watched him interact with his parents differently. He didn't mention Emma during their visit, which seemed strange given how much he usually talked about her. That night, I paid closer attention to Marcus's routine. But now I noticed things I'd missed before. He was holding his phone to his ear, but the screen was black, not on a call, not even turned on. He was having an animated conversation, laughing, asking questions, responding to things Emma was supposedly saying. But I couldn't hear any voice from the phone's speaker. I nodded and tried to act normal, but my skin was crawling. Later that night, around 1 a.m., I woke up to voices in our room. Marcus was talking to someone in a low, intimate tone, the kind of voice you use when you're lying in bed with someone you love. "I missed you so much," he was saying. I could hear another voice responding, but it was too quiet for me to make out words. It sounded like a woman's voice, soft and gentle. I lay still in my bed, pretending to be asleep, while Marcus had what sounded like a normal conversation with someone lying next to him. Marcus asked. The other voice murmured a response. "You're right, he's pretty oblivious." This went on for about 20 minutes, Marcus talking and responding to someone I couldn't see in the darkness. I wanted to turn on the light or sit up to look, but I was afraid of what I might find, or what I might not find. Eventually, the conversation stopped and I heard Marcus whisper, "Good night, Emma." In the morning, Marcus's pillow had long, dark hair on it. I could smell perfume, something floral and sweet that lingered in our room for hours. But I had watched Marcus go to sleep alone. Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-aware of Marcus's behavior patterns. The daily phone calls with Emma, the weekend visits that left physical evidence but no actual visitor, the conversations I heard at night with someone who wasn't there. I started documenting things, partly because I was concerned about Marcus's mental health and partly because I was starting to question my own perception of reality. November 15th, Marcus had a 45-minute phone conversation with Emma, but his phone was off the entire time. November 17th, found long hair on Marcus's pillow and smelled perfume, but saw no one enter or leave our room. November 19th, heard Marcus talking to someone at 2 a.m., but when I quietly looked over, he was alone in his bed. I decided to test whether Emma's visits were real by setting up my phone to record video while I was away from the room. I positioned it to capture Marcus's bed and told him I was going to the library for several hours. When I reviewed the footage later, I saw Marcus preparing for Emma's visit, straightening his bed sheets, putting on cologne, even placing 2 coffee cups on his desk. Then he sat on his bed and had a conversation with empty air for over an hour, responding to comments and questions from someone who wasn't there. At one point, he reached out and appeared to stroke someone's hair, his hand moving through empty space. Later in the video, Marcus lay down and cuddled with empty air, his arms wrapped around nothing, whispering loving words to no one. When I returned to the room, there were 2 used coffee cups on the desk and long hair on his pillow. I called Carol the next day. "I think Marcus is having some kind of breakdown," I told her. Carol was quiet for a long moment. "We'll come get him this weekend," she said finally. That night, I heard the conversation again. Marcus talking intimately with Emma, discussing their future together, making plans for winter break, but this time I heard Emma's voice more clearly. It sounded exactly like Marcus's voice, but pitched higher and softer. Like he was doing both sides of the conversation himself, but unconsciously altering his vocal tone to differentiate between his responses and Emma's. "I wish I could tell Tyler about us," Marcus said in his normal voice. "It's better this way," he replied in the higher, softer tone. I realized that Marcus was having conversations with himself, but he genuinely believed Emma was there responding to him, and somehow this psychological process was creating physical evidence. The hair, the perfume, the coffee cups. He never returned to campus. I heard later that he was receiving intensive psychological treatment and wouldn't be returning to college until he'd made significant progress in therapy. The room felt empty without him, but also relieved. The constant presence of someone who wasn't there had been more unsettling than I'd realized. A few weeks later, I was cleaning out the desk drawers that had been Marcus's when I found a small jewelry box hidden in the back of the bottom drawer. Inside was a class ring with Emma Rodriguez engraved on the inside band. I returned the ring to Carol when I mailed her Marcus's remaining belongings. She called me after receiving the package. "Thank you for looking out for him," she said. "The doctors say this kind of grief response isn't uncommon, especially in young people who lose someone significant. Eventually, I think about Marcus sometimes and I hope he's found a way to move forward. But I also think about those nights when I heard two voices in our room, when I smelled perfume and found evidence of visits that never happened. Because even though I understand now that Emma was a psychological construction, the physical evidence was real. The hair was real. The perfume was real. The coffee cups were real. And I still don't understand how Marcus's mind could create not just the illusion of Emma's presence, but actual, tangible proof that someone had been there. That's the part that keeps me awake at night. Not the grief-induced hallucination, but the reality that somehow Marcus's need for Emma to be alive had made her physically present in ways that defied explanation. Sometimes I wonder if losing someone you love that deeply can create a kind of bridge between what's real and what isn't. And sometimes I wonder if Emma was trying to tell Marcus something through those conversations, even if she existed only in his broken heart. Story 8. The Suicide Door. Room 408 in Hendricks Hall had a reputation. Everyone knew that a student had killed himself there 5 years earlier, jumped from the 4th floor window one December night during finals week. The university had renovated the room afterward, new paint and furniture, but they couldn't change the history. Students called it the suicide room, and most people requested transfers within weeks of being assigned there. I got placed in 408 my sophomore year because enrollment was down and they needed to fill single rooms. I figured the reputation was just superstition, and I needed the quiet space to focus on my pre-med studies. How wrong I was about everything. The room was standard dorm size but felt different from other rooms I'd been in. Colder somehow, even when the heating worked perfectly. The window was larger than normal, a wide casement window that opened outward with a crank handle, offering an unobstructed view of the courtyard 4 streets below. During my first week, I noticed the window had new hardware. Heavy-duty locks, reinforced frames, a mechanism that prevented it from opening more than 6 inches. The university had clearly installed safety measures after the incident, but the modifications only emphasized what had happened there. I tried not to think about it. David Chen, the student who had died, was just a name on old news articles I found online. He'd been a junior studying engineering, described by friends as quiet and academical focused. No one had seen warning signs of depression or suicidal ideation. His death had shocked everyone who knew him. The room felt normal during the day. I attended classes, studied at my desk, talked to friends on the phone, lived the typical college routine. But at night, something was different. I started having vivid dreams about standing at the window. Not nightmares exactly, but intensely realistic dreams where I'd find myself at the window in the middle of the night, looking down at the courtyard below. In these dreams, I'd feel an overwhelming urge to open the window wider, to lean out, to see how far the drop was. I'd wake up disoriented and disturbed, but I attributed the dreams to stress about living in a room with such a dark history. The power of suggestion, psychological contamination from knowing what had happened there. But the dreams became more frequent and more detailed. I'd dream about cranking the window handle, struggling against the safety locks, feeling frustrated that I couldn't open it completely. I'd dream about voices calling to me from the courtyard, encouraging me to come closer to the window. After 2 weeks of these dreams, I started waking up to find myself actually standing at the window. The first time it happened, I assumed I'd been sleepwalking. I woke up around 3 a.m. standing in front of the window in my pajamas, my hand on the crank handle. The window was still closed and locked, but I had no memory of getting out of bed or walking across the room. Sleepwalking wasn't entirely unusual. I'd done it occasionally as a child during periods of stress. I made a mental note to mention it to the campus health center if it continued. But it did continue. Every few nights I'd wake up at the window, sometimes with my hand on the handle, sometimes just standing there staring out at the courtyard. Each time I had no memory of how I'd gotten there. The episode started lasting longer. Instead of waking up immediately upon finding myself at the window, I'd stand there for several minutes, fully conscious but unable to make myself walk away. I'd look down at the courtyard and think about how peaceful it would be to fall, how quiet and final. These weren't thoughts that felt like my own. I'd never been suicidal, never struggled with depression, never had any desire to harm myself. But standing at that window, I'd feel an overwhelming sense that jumping was the right thing to do, the natural thing to do. I'd eventually force myself back to bed, shaken by how appealing the idea of jumping had seemed while I was standing there. After a month of this pattern, I decided to research the history of Room 408 more thoroughly. I found newspaper articles about David Chen's death, memorial posts on social media, and academic records from the university archives, but I also found something else. David wasn't the first student to die in that room. I discovered records of 3 other deaths associated with Room 408 over the past 20 years. All suicides, all jumps from the same window. 1998. Jennifer Walsh, sophomore, psychology major. Found in the courtyard below Room 408 on a Sunday morning in October. 2003, Michael Torres, Jr., business major. Jumped during spring break when the dorm was nearly empty. 2009, David Chen, Jr., engineering major. The death everyone knew about. Each case had been investigated and ruled suicide. Each student had been described as having no obvious warning signs of mental health crisis. Each death had prompted safety modifications to the window, but the modifications had been gradually removed or circumvented over time. Until David's death, which had prompted the permanent safety locks currently installed. I also found records showing that Room 408 had an unusually high rate of room change requests. I started documenting my experiences in a journal, recording each sleepwalking episode and the thoughts I had while standing at the window. The pattern was consistent. I'd wake up at the window, spend several minutes contemplating jumping, then force myself back to bed feeling disturbed and confused. But I also started noticing changes in my mental state during the day. I found myself thinking about the window even when I wasn't in the room. During lectures, I'd daydream about opening it. While studying, I'd glance over at it repeatedly. Most disturbing, I started researching methods of bypassing the safety locks. This wasn't curiosity. It felt like compulsion. I'd find myself looking up lock-picking techniques, reading about window hardware, even considering tools I could use to disable the safety mechanisms. The rational part of my mind knew this was dangerous thinking, but I couldn't stop myself from exploring these ideas. I made an appointment with the campus counseling center. Dr. Patricia Lee was a clinical psychologist who specialized in student mental health. I explained my situation carefully: the sleepwalking, the intrusive thoughts about jumping, the compulsive research into bypassing safety measures. She asked, "Never. That's what's so disturbing about this. Environmental psychology is real," Dr. Lee said. "Living in a space associated with trauma can trigger psychological responses, especially in susceptible individuals." She recommended I request a room change immediately. "But I need to understand what's happening," I said. I hadn't planned to mention my theory, but Dr. Lee seemed open to discussing unconventional possibilities. "What if the room itself is somehow influencing people?" Dr. Lee was quiet for a moment. "That would be a very unusual phenomenon." I agreed to request a room change, but the housing office said it would take 2 to 3 weeks to process and find available space. In the meantime, Dr. Lee prescribed mild sleeping medication to prevent sleepwalking and scheduled twice-weekly counseling sessions. But things got worse before I could move. The medication didn't prevent the sleepwalking episodes, it just made me groggier when I woke up at the window. And now, instead of just thinking about jumping, I started testing the safety locks. I'd wake up to find myself trying to force the window open, using various objects as tools to try to bypass the locking mechanism. I had no memory of gathering these tools or beginning these attempts, but I'd find screwdrivers, butter knives, even my student ID card scattered around the window area. One night, I woke up to discover I'd actually managed to partially defeat one of the locks. The window was open about a foot, far enough to fit through if I climbed up onto the sill. I was standing on the windowsill in my pajamas, looking down at the courtyard when I became fully conscious. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't make myself step down. Part of me wanted to lean forward to see what it would feel like to fall. The urge was so strong that I had to grab the window frame to keep from losing my balance. That's when I heard the voice. "It's easy," someone whispered. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me in the room, but I was alone. The voice had seemed to come from outside the window, from the direction of the courtyard below. I forced myself down from the windowsill and slammed the window shut, re-engaging the safety locks with shaking hands. The next morning, I found something that terrified me more than the voice or the sleepwalking. A journal hidden in the heating vent near my bed. The journal contained entries from 4 different students who had lived in room 408. Their handwriting was different, their names were different, but their experiences were identical to mine. Jennifer Walsh, 1998. "The dreams are getting worse. I keep waking up at the window and it's getting harder to walk away." Michael Torres, 2003. "Found myself on the windowsill last night. Jenny was there in the courtyard beckoning me to jump. But Jenny died 5 years ago." David Chen, 2009. "Michael keeps telling me it's peaceful, that there's no pain. I can see him in the courtyard with the others. They're waiting for me. I don't want to jump, but the urge is getting stronger every night." And a 4th set of entries in handwriting I didn't recognize, dated just 2 years ago. There are 4 of them now: Jennifer, Michael, David, and someone new. They stand in the courtyard every night looking up at my window. They want me to join them. The window locks are stronger now, but I'm getting better at bypassing them. The final entry in this unknown student's handwriting was chilling. "I understand now. Room 408 doesn't make people suicidal, it collects them. The ones who jumped are still here, still tied to this room, still trying to complete what they started. They need others to join them. I'm moving rooms tomorrow. If you're reading this, get out now. I packed my belongings that same day and moved to a friend's couch off campus. I never spent another night in room 408. But I couldn't stop thinking about the journal entries, especially the last one. I researched student records and found that a student named Alex Rivera had been assigned to room 408 2 years ago and had requested an emergency room change after 3 weeks. I tracked down Alex through social media and called him. "You lived in 408, I said when he answered. There was a long pause. "For 6 weeks, yes." Alex was quiet for a moment. "I've been researching this for 2 years, he said finally. "I think something about that room creates a kind of psychic residue. You're the third. There was someone else last year and someone the year before. Because we found the journals and understood what was happening in time." He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. The people who didn't find the warning hidden in the heating vent became part of the collection. I reported everything to Dr. Lee, who documented my account and forwarded it to university administration, with a recommendation that room 408 be permanently removed from housing inventory. As far as I know, the university never acted on that recommendation. Room 408 is probably still being assigned to unsuspecting students who need quiet single rooms for studying. Sometimes I check the local news looking for reports of students jumping from Hendricks Hall. I haven't seen any yet, but I know it's only a matter of time, because some rooms collect darkness and some windows are doorways to something that should never be opened. And sometimes the people who die in a place don't really leave. They just wait patiently for others to join them, whispering from courtyard shadows about how easy it would be to let go. I still have nightmares about standing on that windowsill, feeling the pull of voices calling from below, knowing that one more step would end everything. But mostly I have nightmares about the students who didn't find the journal in time, and I wonder how many voices are calling from that courtyard now.